She was compelled to wed an icy millionaire in court. But on their wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain drizzled softly over the marble steps of the courthouse that afternoon, the gray sky hanging low like a warning. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, Lena Cruz clutched a thin folder to her chest. She was 25 years old, a junior attorney barely keeping her father's small law firm alive. Her shoes were soaked, her blouse stuck to her skin, but what chilled her most was the man waiting for her across the corridor. Ethan Harrington stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, the picture of quiet authority. His charcoal suit was perfectly pressed, his blue eyes unreadable. The richest man in the room and perhaps the coldest. For weeks, Lena had faced him as opposing counsel in a corporate lawsuit. But now the case was over. What he wanted from her next had nothing to do with law. "You want to save your father's firm," Ethan said calmly, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I can make that happen, but there is a condition." Lena frowned, trying to read his face. What kind of condition? He slid a single sheet of paper across the bench between them. It was not a contract, it was a marriage certificate. "Marry me," he said. "Right here, right now." The words hit her like thunder. For a moment, Lena could only stare at him. "This is a joke." "It is not." His tone did not waver. "My board demands a stable public image before the merger next month. A wife would solve that. You need financial protection. I need credibility. It is business." Lena's pulse quickened. The rain outside drummed harder against the courthouse windows. "You are asking me to marry a man I barely know." Ethan's expression softened for just a second. "You know enough to understand. I keep my word. Your father's debt will be erased. The firm will survive." Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Pride told her to walk away. But she could see her father's tired face in her mind, the man who had raised her after her mother's passing, the man who had mortgaged everything to pay hospital bills. He had always said, "Do what is right, even when it hurts." Lena looked down at the paper. Her hand trembled as she took the pen. "Why me?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Because you are honest. And because you are desperate enough to tell me the truth." "Oh?" Her signature bled slightly into the page, the blue ink smearing under her fingers. When she lifted her hand, a tiny blot remained a mark of everything she was giving up. A court clerk walked by and stopped. Ethan's voice was calm, almost casual. "We would like to register this now." The man blinked, surprised, but nodded. Within minutes, the document was sealed and stamped. The sound of the clerk's rubber stamp echoed through the hallway like a gavel. It was done. Ethan turned toward her. "Mrs. Harrington," he said quietly. Lena flinched at the title. It did not sound romantic. It sounded like a verdict. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Ethan opened an umbrella, motioned for her to step under it, and walked her to a waiting black car. The driver opened the door. Lena hesitated at the threshold, her reflection wavering on the wet pavement. In that reflection, she barely recognized herself, a woman who had traded her name for survival. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Ethan said, without looking at her, "We will draft the terms tonight. 6 months. Appear at all public events. Maintain the image. Nothing more." Lena turned toward the window. Raindrops streaked down the glass like the pages of a contract she could no longer read. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "Nothing more." Neither of them knew then how wrong that promise would become. The rain had stopped by the time the car reached the Harrington estate, but the sky was still heavy and gray. The mansion stood at the end of a long driveway lined with dark oak trees. It looked more like a museum than a home. Wide marble stairs led up to massive iron doors that opened silently as the car rolled to a stop. Lena stepped out, clutching her small purse, her reflection trembling on the wet stone. Inside, the air was cool and still. A housekeeper in a black uniform appeared almost immediately. "Welcome, Mrs. Harrington," she said with a polite bow. The words felt foreign. Lena managed a stiff nod, unsure how to respond. Ethan walked ahead of her, his steps echoing on the polished floor. "This will be your home for the next 6 months," he said without turning around. "The staff has been informed of our arrangement. You will have your own room." Arrangement," she repeated softly, tasting the word like something bitter. He finally looked back. "It is just business, Miss Cruz, nothing more." She wanted to tell him that she had never been good at pretending, but the words stayed trapped behind her teeth. The housekeeper led her upstairs to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. A chandelier hung from the ceiling. The bed was covered in silk sheets. On the nightstand sat a vase of white lilies, their scent too pure for how she felt. When the door closed, Lena sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. She had signed her name, and now she was here, a stranger in a palace. Outside her window, the city lights shimmered through the mist like a distant promise she could no longer touch. Dinner that evening was silent. The dining table was long enough to seat 20 people, yet only 2 plates were set. A chef brought out courses that looked like art pieces more than food. Ethan ate without a word, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. "Is this how you usually eat?" Lena asked finally, forcing a small smile. "Yes," he said simply. "No one to talk to?" He paused, knife halfway to his plate. "I talk when it is necessary." Lena lowered her eyes. "That must be lonely." He said nothing. The silence stretched between them until it felt like another wall in the mansion. She reached for her glass, her hand unsteady. The crystal slipped slightly, water splashing onto the tablecloth. "I am sorry," she murmured, grabbing a napkin. Before she could wipe it, Ethan was already there, his hand brushing hers as he steadied the glass. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. His were sharp but not cruel. Then he stepped back, returning to his seat as if nothing had happened. After dinner, Lena found herself wandering down a corridor lined with paintings. Most were portraits, cold faces in gilded frames. She stopped before one of a woman in a white dress, her expression serene but distant. The plaque read, "Eleanor Harrington, 1996. "She was my mother." Ethan's voice came from behind her. Lena turned. "She looks kind." "She was," he said, his gaze fixed on the portrait. "She died when I was 20. "I am sorry." He nodded once, then said quietly, "Do not apologize for things you did not cause." For a moment, his mask slipped. The cold businessman faded, and she saw something else, grief, old and unhealed. But just as quickly, he straightened his shoulders and changed the subject. "The household staff will prepare a schedule for public events. I expect you to attend each one." "Yes, Mr. Harrington." He frowned slightly. "It is Ethan." "Right," she said, almost whispering. "Ethan." That night, she could not sleep. The silk sheets felt strange against her skin, the silence too thick. She got up and walked to the balcony. The wind brushed her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain and city smoke. Below, the garden lights glowed in neat lines, perfect and lifeless. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Footsteps echoed, slow and steady. She turned, half expecting to see him, but the corridor was empty. Still, she felt his presence like the hum of a storm waiting to return. In the study, Ethan sat alone, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He stared at the marriage certificate lying on the desk. The ink from her signature had smudged slightly, a small imperfection on an otherwise flawless page. His fingers brushed over it, tracing the stain. He told himself this was business, a solution to a problem, but the quiet truth settled heavier with every breath. For the first time in years, Ethan Harrington had invited someone into his world, and he did not know why. Upstairs, Lena looked at the rain beginning to fall again and whispered, 6 months. I can survive 6 months. But deep down, she already knew that some contracts are easier to sign than to escape. The following morning, the sound of distant thunder lingered in the sky. Lena woke early, though she had barely slept. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, as if every wall was listening. When she stepped into the hallway, the housekeeper was already waiting, holding a silver tray with a note on it. "Mr. Harrington asked me to give you this," the woman said. The note was short and precise, written in Ethan's neat handwriting. "Meet me in the study at 9 o'clock. We have terms to discuss." Lena dressed carefully in the modest blouse and skirt she had packed from her apartment. Everything in her suitcase looked out of place here, surrounded by luxury. When she reached the study, Ethan was standing by the window, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. "You are punctual," he said, closing a file. "That is good. I figured I should start as I mean to go on," she replied quietly. Ethan gestured to the chair across from his desk. On the polished wood sat a thick folder, stamped with his company logo, Harrington Holdings. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is the official agreement for our arrangement. It outlines the conditions of our marriage and the expectations of public appearances. Read it carefully before you sign." "Oh well." Lena's eyes moved across the pages, each clause colder than the one before. She would attend 5 major events, appear in 1 photo shoot for a charity campaign, and refrain from speaking to the press without his approval. She would live in the estate, dine with him publicly, and keep up the illusion of a loving marriage until the merger was complete. When she reached the final page, her throat tightened. "Clause number 6, she read aloud. "No emotional involvement or personal attachment of any kind." She looked up at him. "Is that really necessary?" Ethan's gaze held hers for a moment. "Necessary," he said, "and mutually beneficial. It keeps things clean." "Clean," she echoed softly, setting the pen down. "You make love sound like a liability." "It is," he replied. The room went still. Outside, rain began again, tapping lightly against the glass. Lena signed her name, the blue ink bleeding slightly like it had before. When she handed the papers back, Ethan slid them into a folder and locked it in his desk drawer. "Welcome to our partnership," he said, extending a hand. Lena hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm but not cruel. It felt more like sealing a deal than beginning a life together. For the next few days, her life became a quiet rhythm of routines. Breakfasts served on silver trays, fittings for gowns she did not choose, lessons in etiquette from a patient but humorless assistant named Miriam. Lena practiced smiling in the mirror until it no longer looked forced. On the 3rd evening, she joined Ethan at a dinner with business associates. Cameras flashed as they stepped out of the car. She smiled as he placed a steady hand on her back, the gesture practiced yet strangely protective. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. One of the investors leaned toward her. "You are a brave woman, Mrs. Harrington. Marrying into this empire must be quite the adventure." Lena forced a polite laugh. "Adventure is one word for it." Ethan glanced at her, the faintest trace of a smirk touching his lips. For a moment, she saw something human in his expression, then it was gone. Later that night, when they returned home, Lena removed her earrings in front of the mirror. "You did not have to touch my back in front of them," she said, not turning around. "It was expected," Ethan replied. "Appearances matter." "So do boundaries," she said softly. He hesitated before answering. "You are right." Their eyes met in the mirror's reflection, a fragile truce passing between them. Days passed. Slowly, the ice began to shift. He would ask about her cases at the law firm, and she would ask about his company. She discovered that behind the perfect posture and guarded eyes was a man who had built everything from fear of losing control. He discovered that behind her quiet strength was a woman who had already lost too much to stop fighting. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. The lights flickered and died, plunging the mansion into darkness. Lena found Ethan in the library, standing by the window with a flashlight. "Are you afraid of the dark, Mr. Harrington?" she teased lightly. He gave a faint smile. "Only of what it hides." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. For the first time, she noticed the faint scar near his temple. "How did you get that?" she asked. "Car accident," he said quietly. "A long time ago." "Someone important?" He nodded once. She was. The silence that followed was soft, not cold. The storm outside raged, but inside the two of them stood close, shadows crossing in the flickering light. Lena said, almost a whisper, "You know, contracts end, but people do not have to." Ethan looked at her, his eyes unreadable, and for a moment she thought he might say something real. But then the lights came back on, and just like that, the spell broke. He turned away, his voice steady once more. "Good night, Mrs. Harrington." Lena watched him leave, her heart aching for reasons she could not name. As the door closed, she whispered to the empty room, "Good night, Ethan." Oh. Outside, thunder rolled again, as if reminding them both that some storms never really end, they only change form. A week passed, and the air in the Harrington estate felt a little less cold. Lena had started to find her rhythm among the servants and daily rituals. Every morning, she joined breakfast with Ethan in the sunroom, where soft light poured through tall windows. He read the financial reports while she quietly stirred her coffee. It was not warm, but it was calm. One morning, Ethan said without looking up from his tablet, "We have a charity gala on Friday night. You will need to attend." Lena blinked. "A charity gala? For what cause?" "The Harrington Foundation's annual education fund," he said. "You will wear the blue gown in your closet. The stylist will arrive at 3 o'clock." She nodded, unsure what to say. The way he delivered instructions reminded her of a courtroom order, precise and detached. But she knew appearances mattered. When Friday came, the mansion buzzed with quiet preparation. The stylist pinned Lena's hair into soft waves and zipped her into a gown that shimmered under the lights. As she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a woman who belonged in Ethan's world, even if she did not feel it. Ethan appeared in the doorway dressed in a black suit, his tie perfectly knotted. For a moment, his eyes lingered on her before he said simply, "You look presentable." She arched a brow. "Presentable? That is the best you can do?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Fine. You look beautiful." The admission caught her off guard, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt different, lighter, uncertain. The gala was held at a grand hotel downtown. Photographers lined the entrance, flashes bursting like tiny explosions. As they stepped out of the limousine, Ethan placed a hand on her waist. The gesture was gentle but deliberate. "Smile," he murmured. "We are supposed to look in love." She tilted her head up toward him, whispering back, "Pretending seems to be your best skill." He looked down at her, his voice calm. "And yours seems to be making me forget. It is pretend." Inside the ballroom, music floated through the air. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, and elegant guests mingled with champagne in hand. Lena kept close to Ethan, feeling the weight of curious eyes. Halfway through the evening, a man in a gray suit approached them. His tone was mocking. "Ethan Harrington, the coldest man in finance, finally married. And to such a lovely woman. Tell me, Mrs. Harrington, is it true you were a lawyer from the public side of town?" Lena froze, caught between shock and anger. She saw the faint smirk on the man's lips. Before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was smooth but firm. "Careful, Victor. You are speaking to my wife." The man raised his hands. "Just teasing. No offense meant." "Then learn when not to joke," Ethan said sharply. The nearby guests turned to watch, and Victor quickly retreated. Lena looked up at Ethan, her heart pounding. "You did not have to defend me." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "You are my wife, at least in the eyes of everyone here." For the rest of the night, the air between them was charged with something unspoken. When the orchestra began a slow waltz, Ethan offered his hand. "One dance," he said. "I do not dance," she murmured. "Neither do I," he replied. "That makes two of us." She hesitated but took his hand. As they moved across the floor, the rest of the room seemed to fade. His touch was firm, his steps precise. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the charade felt almost real. Later, in the car ride home, the city lights flickered past the windows. Lena finally broke the silence. "Why did you marry me, Ethan? Really?" He stared out at the dark streets. "Because I needed someone who would not lie to me." "That is not much of a compliment," she said softly. "It is more than you think," he replied. Back at the estate, rain began again. As they entered the foyer, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Work call," he said shortly, stepping into his study. Lena removed her earrings, her mind still spinning from the night's events. She walked toward the grand staircase, but a faint light from the study drew her attention. The door was slightly open, and she could hear Ethan's voice low, controlled, but tense. "Tell the board the merger will proceed on schedule. The marriage contract is solid. She will play her part." Lena froze. The words hit like a physical blow. "Contract. Play her part. She turned away before she could hear more, her chest tight. In her room, she sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. The blue gown shimmered faintly under the lamp, the same color as the ink of her signature. For a moment, she thought of tearing the contract apart, but she knew it would solve nothing. Downstairs, Ethan ended the call and poured himself a drink. He stared at the reflection in the window, his own face, expressionless as always, but now there was something else in his eyes. Something that looked suspiciously like guilt. Upstairs, Lena whispered into the silence. 6 months. Her voice cracked. I just have to make it 6 months. Outside, the thunder rolled once more, as if the storm that bound them had only just begun. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed in pale sunlight. But inside the Harrington estate, the air felt heavier than before. Lena moved quietly through the halls, avoiding Ethan's gaze at breakfast. He was reading the newspaper, his face calm, as if last night's call had never happened. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. Finally, she said, I heard you talking on the phone. Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. You should not listen to private conversations. I did not mean to, she said softly. But I heard enough. She will play her part. That is what you said. His jaw tightened. It was a figure of speech. Do not take everything so personally. Her voice trembled. How can I not? You talk about me as if I am a business deal, not a person. He set the newspaper down, his tone sharp. You knew what this was from the start. You signed the agreement. I am keeping my end of it. Lena stood up, her chair scraping the floor. I may have signed your papers, Ethan, but I did not sell my dignity. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Hours later, she sat alone in the garden. The morning sun touched the rose bushes, but her heart felt cold. She thought of her father, of why she had agreed to all this. And for the first time she wondered if she had made a mistake that could not be undone. When Ethan passed by the window, he saw her sitting there, shoulders tense, eyes distant. Something twisted inside him. He remembered the way she had smiled at the gala, the way her hand had fit in his when they danced. He had not meant to hurt her. He had simply never learned how not to. That evening, Lena received a message from Miriam, the assistant. Mr. Harrington will not be home for dinner. Business meeting. Lena nodded silently. She ate alone, the ticking of the clock loud in the vast dining room. After dinner, she wandered into the study. On the desk lay an old photo frame turned face down. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted it. It was a picture of a young woman with dark hair, laughing, her hand on Ethan's shoulder. On the back, a name was engraved, Isabel. Lena set it down carefully, her mind swirling. So there had been someone. Maybe that was why he had built walls so high no one could reach him. Late that night, when Ethan returned, he found her still awake, sitting on the couch with the fireplace flickering low. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, anger, pain, and something else neither dared to name. She stood, her voice quiet but steady. You do not have to explain. I understand now. You are not heartless, Ethan. You are just afraid. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, barely above a whisper, Good night, Lena. She turned away, but as she climbed the stairs, she could feel his gaze follow her. And for the first time, the mansion did not feel cold because of its walls, but because of the distance between the two hearts living inside it. Days passed in uneasy silence. Lena kept her distance, burying herself in reading and helping the housekeeper with small tasks just to keep her mind occupied. Ethan spent long hours at the office, returning home late and tired. Yet every night, she would hear his footsteps pause outside her door, as if he wanted to knock but never did. One afternoon, the estate was filled with preparations for another social event. This time, it was a dinner for the company's board of directors. Lena dressed carefully in a simple cream gown, her hair tied loosely at the back. When Ethan entered the room to escort her downstairs, he paused for a brief second. You look elegant, he said quietly. Thank you, she replied, her tone polite, though her heart was still guarded. The dinner began smoothly. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and photographers captured every perfect moment. But as the night went on, one of the directors, an older man named Mr. Dalton, decided to test her with a cruel smirk. Tell us, Mrs. Harrington, how much is your love worth these days? Or should we ask your husband? The table went silent. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her composure. Before she could answer, Ethan's chair scraped against the floor. "That is enough," he said coldly. "You forget yourself, Dalton." Dalton laughed awkwardly. "It was only a joke." Ethan's voice was firm. "I do not find it funny to insult my wife." "Oh." The other guests quickly changed the topic, but the damage had been done. Lena felt her throat tighten with emotion. For the first time, he had defended her not as part of a contract, but as something real. Later that night, after everyone had left, Ethan found her standing alone in the garden. The moonlight glowed across the fountain, soft and silver. "I should not have let them speak to you like that," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You did not have to defend me, but you did." "Thank you." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You are stronger than they think. And you are kinder than you pretend to be," she said softly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, hesitant, and entirely human. Under the moonlight, their walls began to crack just a little. And in that silence, the first spark of something genuine flickered between them, fragile but real. The days following the board dinner felt different. Something unspoken had shifted between them. Ethan had started joining Lena for morning coffee, and sometimes they even talked about small things, the garden, the weather, a book she had been reading. The silence that once filled the house now felt less like a wall and more like a pause between breaths. But peace never lasts long in a world built on power. One afternoon, Lena was reading in the library when Miriam, the assistant, entered with a worried look. "Mrs. Harrington, you should see this," she said, handing her a tablet. On the screen was a headline splashed across a popular gossip site: "Fake marriage scandal. Sources claim CEO Ethan Harrington paid lawyer to pose as wife." Below it were photos from the gala and dinner, cropped and twisted to fit the story. Lena's hands went cold. Who would do this? Miriam hesitated. It came from inside the company. Someone leaked it to the press. Before Lena could respond, Ethan stormed into the room, his phone pressed to his ear. "I said shut it down. Every article, every image." He hung up and looked at her, his expression tight with fury and something close to fear. "I will fix this," he said. Lena's voice trembled. "Can you?" "I have handled worse," he said. But his eyes told a different story. By evening, the house was surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed through the gates, shouting questions about the contract marriage. Lena stood by the window, watching as Ethan paced the foyer. "This will ruin the merger," he muttered. "This is about more than your merger," she said quietly. "This is about my name." He stopped. "You think I do not know that? I never wanted this to touch you." "Yet it did," she said. "Because of you." The anger in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. Ethan turned away, jaw clenched. "You should stay out of sight until it dies down." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Hide, you mean? Pretend again?" "No, Ethan. I am done pretending." She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "You said this was business, but somewhere along the way, it became personal. I do not know what is real anymore." "Neither do I," he said quietly. For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the distance between them heavy with everything left unsaid. Then Lena took off her wedding ring and placed it on the table. "You may own the contract, Ethan, but you will never own me." She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing through the grand hall. Ethan called her name once, but she did not stop. That night, she packed a small bag and left the mansion. The rain started again, falling in steady sheets as she stepped into the waiting cab. Through the rear window, the lights of the Harrington estate blurred into gold and gray. Inside, Ethan stood at the window watching her leave, his reflection fractured by raindrops. For the first time in years, he felt something that no amount of wealth could control: loss. And for Lena, driving into the wet night, freedom had never felt so painful. The rain did not stop for 2 days. Lena stayed in a small apartment on the east side of the city, one she had rented long before the marriage. It was barely furnished, but it was quiet. For the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations. Still, every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face in the doorway, calling her name as she left. She tried to focus on rebuilding her work. The small law firm she had once fought to save needed her again. Clients returned, slowly but steadily, and Lena threw herself into the cases with all the strength she had left. But at night, when the city lights flickered across her ceiling, she wondered if he had meant what he said that night. Neither do I. Meanwhile, Ethan faced the consequences of his silence. The board demanded explanations, the merger stalled, and his public image collapsed under headlines that would not die. But he did not fight back immediately. Instead, he gathered proof emails, financial logs, and leaked communications. What he found cut deep. The source of the scandal was not a reporter. It was his own cousin, Victor, the same man who had mocked Lena at the gala. Victor had planned everything, hoping to discredit Ethan and seize control of the company. That evening, Ethan called an emergency meeting. Cameras flashed as he entered the boardroom. His voice was calm but cold, as he played the recordings of Victor's conversations. "This is the truth," Ethan said. "The marriage was legal, and it was mine to protect. The lies were not hers, they were his." The room fell silent. Reporters scribbled notes, and the tide began to turn. Ethan stepped away from the podium, his voice lower now. "But I did make one mistake. I treated someone real like a contract, and in doing so, I lost her." The next morning, a press release appeared across every major outlet. Ethan Harrington resigned as CEO. The statement ended simply, "Integrity is worth more than empire." That same day, he left the city without saying where he was going. But everyone knew why. Somewhere beyond the noise of cameras and contracts, he was searching for the woman who had taught him what it meant to be human. Spring came early that year. The city parks bloomed with cherry blossoms, and the air carried the faint scent of new beginnings. Lena was sitting in her small office, surrounded by files and coffee cups, when her assistant knocked on the door. "There is someone asking for you," the girl said softly. "He says his name is Ethan Harrington." Lena froze. The pen slipped from her hand and rolled across the desk. She stood slowly, her pulse quickening. "Send him in," she whispered. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside. He looked different, tired, older somehow, but there was warmth in his eyes that had never been there before. He wore no suit today, only a plain gray coat. In his hands, he held a small folder and a single white lily. "Hello, Lena," he said quietly. She stood behind her desk, unsure what to do. "I thought you left the city." "Oh, I did," he said. "But there was something I had to make, right before I could leave for good." He placed the folder on her desk and pushed it toward her. "This is proof that your father's debt is cleared, completely." "I kept my promise." Lena glanced at the papers but said nothing. "You did not have to come here for that." "Yes, I did," Ethan replied. "I owed you the truth. The truth is, I built walls because I was afraid. And when you walked away, I realized I had spent my whole life protecting an empire that meant nothing." Her throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I do not want to protect anything anymore," he said. "I just want to earn what I lost." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same wedding ring she had left behind months ago. The smudge of blue ink still marked its inside curve. "You once said contracts end. But people do not have to." "You were right." "Oh." Lena stared at the ring, her heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid. "Ethan, this is not something you can fix with paperwork or apologies." "I know," he said softly. "That is why I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to start again. No contracts this time." For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Then Lena walked around the desk and stopped in front of him. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the cold CEO, but the man beneath the man who had fallen, broken, and finally learned how to stand without his armor. She took the lily from his hand. "You are a difficult man to forgive," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," he admitted, a faint smile touching his lips, "but I am willing to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." Lena hesitated, then slipped the ring back into his palm. "Then, let us not call it forgiveness. Let us call it a beginning." Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, soft and golden. Ethan took her hand gently, holding it as if it were something sacred. "No contracts," he said. "No contracts," she repeated. Weeks later, friends and family gathered in a small garden behind Lena's office. There were no reporters, no photographers, no headlines, just laughter, music, and the scent of lilies. As Ethan placed the ring on her finger once more, he whispered, "The first time I asked, it was business. This time, it is love." Lena smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Then this is the only deal I will never break." When they kissed, the crowd cheered, and the cherry blossoms drifted like falling snow. And as the camera of time pulled back from that quiet garden, the narrator's voice would have said, "Some contracts are written in ink, others are written in the heart, and when love is real, no signature is ever needed."